So the second observational method we're going to be discussing within human subject research is interviews. So qualitative methods like interviewing can be really useful because you can just learn a lot from talking to people. For example, if you want to know what educators think of ChatGPT, why not just talk to them? They could probably tell you a lot just by asking them. Anonymized interviews are also often exempt sources of research data. So if you're thinking about making sure you have time to finish your course project, then interviews could be a way to get information or data that you need on the timeline of this class. So in brief, some steps to doing good interview research are to decide who you're interviewing, so what group of people or with what motivation, then to plan an interview guide, so figuring out what you'll ask about, and deciding if it'll be structured or semi-structured, how much leeway you're going to give in terms of what they bring up. And then you're going to figure out how you collect notes according to your IRB approval. And after that, there are two approaches that you can do within qualitative coding of these interview notes. So if you take an inductive approach, that means that you look at the interview data, you derive themes from the data itself, then you label the themes in the data, and maybe you summarize them or count them in some way to make sense of the interviews. And then a deductive approach starts with a list of themes that you go in knowing you're looking for, then you label the data with that list of themes. Finally, you analyze. So you describe the data, you perform statistical analysis according to the goals of your research project and the aims of your research question. And of course, as always, if you want more details on this, just come talk to us. So here's a story from some recent research that we believe exemplifies this idea that qualitative and quantitative methods can support each other. And in particular, we had some really interesting interview findings that led to some findings for the paper overall. So here's an example of how interview research recently helped come to some interesting findings in a workshop paper in the text-to-image model space. So brief aside from the LLM space we've been focusing on, to hear a story about a project trying to look at how text-to-image models affect design. So we had participants do some ideation with a text-to-image model before building a sculpture. So the participant would prompt the model with some things they wanted to visualize, then we would visualize it, then they would build a sculpture. So what we did here was we actually had the participant do their prompting, look at their images, then we would ask the participant, did this image inform your design? The interviewer would take some notes, the interviewer would synthesize answers, pull out and analyze themes. And then from this process, we learned that participants were using prompting in the creative process for different reasons. And that was something that emerged from the notes we had from the 30+ interviews that we had in participants during this experiment. So the way that we quantified the way that people were using prompting differently was that we quantified the degree of conceptual exploration that people did over 3 different prompts. So there's more details on this in the paper, but essentially we had an embedding of the prompt. Then we took the average cosine distance across these embeddings. And then here for this visualization, we just did dimensionality reduction to visualize it in 2D. So in green, you have an example of someone here who did a lot of conceptual exploration. So the amount of, or the cosine distance was high between their 3 prompts. And then in purple, you have someone who had very little conceptual exploration because the average cosine distance between their prompts was very low. So this is how we quantified and described some of the things that we had picked up on in the interviews. But another thing that came out of the interviews as a theme was that some people had a sculpture idea going into the exercise where they visualized their ideas and some didn't. We were able to relate this to the average cosine distance that people had across their prompts. And what we found was that participants who came in with an idea explored less through their prompting journey. So they had lower average cosine distance across their 3 prompts than those who did not have an idea going in. So this interview theme became something we measured that emerged from interviews. And then we were able to relate it to this quantitative measure in order to find out that there are different relationships and reasons that people are using prompting. So a different version of this, of course, might ask people to pre-register whether they had a sculpture idea idea or not, but for a workshop where we had kind of a pilot study on this, we had something really important come out of interviews, which was learning that the design stage someone is in affects their prompting style. So the takeaway here is that interviews can support mixed method research, and we encourage you to choose methods for your project that fits your goals and background.